Welcome to Studio Fabricana. I'm Myles, and I'm here to introduce our two-part series on making a bikini bathing suit. It's a follow-up to our one-piece suit video that we did that's going to introduce a few things that weren't covered in that first video. One is people have been asking about how to line the front and the back of the suit. People have also asked about inserting bra cups into the top, and also it's going to show us how to make these really nice little skinny straps. So let's get started. Part one of our video is going to show us how to make the bottoms, which is going to show us how to line the front and back of the bottoms, as well as apply the elastic to the waist and the legs. If you're lucky, you live close to a fabric store that has an amazing array of swimwear fabrics like these ones, including some great dots, stripes, novelties, maybe even this fun splashy print that we're going to use today for our video. Some people might wonder if it's worth trying to make your own swimsuit. And with the cost of swimwear these days, when you look at the price of the fabrics, it really will be. And there's an amazing selection, including lots of fun, flashy things that you might not swim in, but they'd be great for posing. When we first made our video for the one-piece bathing suit, we lined the whole front of the suit, but didn't line the back. And people have asked us, what would the procedure be if you wanted to do lining on the front and the back? So for our bikini bottoms, we're going to show you exactly that procedure. So the first thing you're going to do is you're going to take your bottoms, the back, and you're going to lay it with the right side up. Then you're going to take the front of the bottom and you're going to lay it with the right side down. So you have right sides together, front and back. Then you're going to take your lining piece for the front, and your right side is going to be facing up. And then finally, we're going to take the back piece and it's going to be right side facing down. So you've got the two lining pieces are facing each other. And then we're going to pin it. So once we have our 4 layers done, as you can see, we've got our back piece, the front lining, and finally the back lining. We need to pin them all together along that crotch seam. So I'm going to line up these 2 front pieces with the back piece. And then I'm going to overlay the lining back piece at the corner. And I'm going to put a pin in to hold it in place. Then we're going to go to the other corner. We're going to do the same thing, lining up the front and back, and the front lining, and then the back lining. And once we're happy that it's in the right spot, we're going to stick a pin in. And once we've pinned the corners, we need to match the center. Just kind of lay it nicely. We'll be able to do a little bit more finagling once we get it to the machine, but we just want to make sure it's in place when we get to the sewing machine. So we'll put one more pin in. So now we're looking at the side seam of the bottoms, and we're basically going to do the same procedure we did with the crotch, although this is going to be a little bit easier because it's a straight seam. We're not dealing with any curved seams. So we're looking at our back piece. We're overlaying the front piece. We also have the front lining. And finally, we overlay the back lining. And again, starting from one corner, we are going to line it up and put in a pin to hold it. Again, it doesn't have to be perfect. We can kind of fix it a little bit once we get to the machine. And then we're going to do the bottom corner of that seam and place a pin. And then just for good measure, we're going to put a pin partway down that side seam. And then we're going to repeat the same process for the other side. Part of our goal with making these videos is to show people that they can make successful swimwear without owning a serger. So we've set our regular sewing machine to a zigzag stitch with approximately a 1/4 inch wide zigzag because that's the size of our seam allowance for this pattern. ready to sew our side seam. I'm just going to remove the first pin, and I'm going to set it under the needle. I'm going to do a back stitch to start. And then very important to note is that I'm not going to be stretching the fabric as I sew. I'm going to gently guide it through the machine. Because we're using a zigzag stitch, that's what's going to allow the garment to stretch after it's made. We don't need to stretch the fabric as we sew. So once we've sewn the crotch seam through all 4 layers and the side seams, now here's where the magic happens, where you get a lined garment. Basically, if we turn it inside out and put the back lining towards the back and the front lining towards the front, you can see when we open it up that all the seam allowances are encased between the 2 backs on the side, and that they're also, all the seam allowances are encased between the 2 back pieces at the crotch. So there's no exposed seams. So once we have all the bottom pieces sewn together, the next thing we're going to need to do is apply the elastic. So please refer to your pattern to see how much you need for the waist. That'll be the longest piece, and then you'll need 2 leg pieces, and they'll be a little bit smaller. We're using a 3/8 of an inch wide all rubber elastic. It'll be very durable, so it's be very suitable for swimwear. The next thing we want to do is to create a loop out of all of our elastic pieces. So one thing to make sure of is that when you make your loop that your elastic is not twisted, because then it won't lay flat in your garment. Our pattern calls for a 1 centimeter or a 3/8 of an inch overlap, and we're going to sew that together just with a regular straight stitch on machine, or we're going to do a bunch of back stitching to make sure that we have a secure seam. And we're going to be applying the elastic to the leg opening. So we're going to divide the leg opening into quarters, and we're also going to do the same for our elastic. Now please note that the distance between our side seam and our crotch seam is not halfway between the seam. So we need to choose one of those seams to be where we're going to start, and we're going to start from the crotch seam. So let's just put a pin in there to indicate that. The next thing we need to do is we need to measure along that leg opening just by folding all the layers together in order to find our halfway point, and that's there. So we're going to put in another pin, and then what we do is we open our leg opening back again. We bring our 2 pins together, and then we go along the leg opening to one side to find the quarter way, 1/4 of the way around the leg, and we do the same thing on the other side. We line up our halfway points, and then we go along the leg opening until we find the point that's 1/4 of the way around the leg. And we apply a pin. So now we're going to follow the same procedure, marking the quarters in our elastic. So we're going to fold our elastic at the seam, and we're going to find the halfway point, put in a pin. We're going to bring that pin and line it up with the seam, fold it in half again to find the 1/4 mark, stick in a pin, without pinning ourselves, and we're going to go to the other side, again lining up the pin with the seam, going to the other end, finding that 1/4 of the elastic, and now we've got our elastic in quarters. So now we're going to pin our elastic that's quartered to our leg hole that's quartered. And what I would recommend, so you don't have any bulk, extra bulk, at the seam allowances or across the front of your body, I would take the seam allowance and mark it with the pin that kind of sits at the back of the suit. And once we've got the seam allowance matched with that pin, we're going to pin it together. And then we're going to follow all the other parts of the elastic, and we're going to find the corresponding pins and pin them together. So once we have all of the quarter points matched and pinned, make sure that your elastic is not twisted, and you'll also notice that the distance of the elastic is actually smaller than the leg opening, because that's what's going to hold the suit into our body after it's sewn. So don't worry if your elastic seems kind of small for the opening. Now we're ready to sew the elastic to the suit. So I'm going to start sewing at the seam allowance, and I'm going to leave the pin in until just I get it placed under the presser foot. Then I'm going to pull the pin out just to make sure that nothing slips or moves before I get the pin out. We've set our machine back to our original two-step zigzag stitch at about a 1/4 inch width. Now this time, as we sew, because our elastic is smaller than the leg opening, we need to stretch the elastic, but we don't want to be stretching so much that our fabric is stretching. We want to stretch just enough that the elastic is laying flat on the fabric. Once we've sewn the elastic to the leg opening, the next thing we're going to do is top stitch it down. We're going to change our machine to a 3-part zigzag, just looks a little bit nicer. And we're going to be stitching from the top. We're going to use the inside edge of our elastic as a guide to fold our seam allowance, our hem. And we're going to start sewing at a kind of an inobvious area. So we're going to start sewing at the crotch seam. Because you're going to be stopping and starting, you want to have it in a spot that's going to be hidden. I'm going to use the edge of my presser foot as a guide for the hem. And again, I'm just giving a little bit of tension as I sew to keep the fabric flat, but I'm not actually stretching the fabric, I'm just stretching it, the elastic, so that the fabric lays flat. So a little bit of a trick going over the bump. You might want to have to just guide it through a little bit so you don't have a big knot. We're just going to continue sewing so that the hem is lining up with the edge of our presser foot. And just giving a little bit of tension as we sew to keep the elastic taut and the fabric flat. So now that we've applied all of the elastic around the leg openings and the waist, we've sewn it in and top stitched it with a little triple stitch zigzag, so it's got a nice stretch to it. I want to show you also the inside of the garment, how the lining is nice and smooth at the crotch and the side seams. And the other thing I want to say is, don't be discouraged if you find your suit's a little bit kind of wavy and warbly. Basically, swimsuit patterns are made with what's called negative ease, which means it's actually smaller than your body. So it's always going to stretch out once it's put on. So let's take a look at what it looks like on our mannequin. So as you can see, even though all along the elastic it looked wavy before it was on the body, once it's on the body and there's that snug fit, everything fits nice and smoothly.